Hi, and welcome to a special press clips edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Thursday, March 16th. Don't forget to wear green tomorrow or you'll be pinched. And I am very pleased to welcome back my colleague, Melinda Burns, to talk about her latest story on the cannabis issue. Melinda is in her fifth decade of covering news in Santa Barbara, for those who don't know. And I think if you took a poll of her colleagues here about who's the top deep dive, in-depth enterprise investigative reporter, Melinda would win hands down. She's also a community hero because the reporting she does, which is unmatched by anyone, not even close, on this issue, on the debris flow, on other big issues facing Santa Barbara, she does for free. She is a volunteer citizen journalist. Everybody gets access to her stuff. And the one place you can be sure you will always read Melinda's stuff is on Newsmakers. We have the latest story up now. County pot revenue plunges amid state weed glut. Caps's tough cannabis questions touch a nerve. Melinda, thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Jerry, for inviting me.
You know, we used to say there are no bad stories, there are only bad reporters. And, you know, yesterday or Tuesday's meeting of the supervisors on this issue was one of those things where someone who covers things like this might just mail it in, do a brief or kiss it off entirely, which apparently several of our colleagues have done. You, however, covered it in depth and in great detail, and also very clearly, I must say, for all the complexities of this issue. But, the biggest takeaway for me was Supervisor Capps, who's newly on the board, says the revenue update is a wake-up call for change. Why did she say that?
Well, this was the quarterly budget update from the CEO's office. And there was a lot of good news out of property taxes because more houses have sold in the last couple of years, so assessments are higher. So that was coming in $17 million more than expected. Interest rates, a couple million more than interest, a couple million more than expected, and the bed tax, 2 million more. Even sales tax is up. And then there's cannabis, which from a peak of 16 million in 2021 dropped to maybe 9 million 2021, 22. And now halfway through 22-23 fiscal year, we've got 3.5 million collected.
Barely one third of what was projected.
What was forecast for the whole year. They were expecting more than 16 million this year. And they're now reducing that to somewhere around 6 million. It might be a little bit more, but we won't know really till the next quarter. So downward trend, definitely because of the glut on the market.
Yeah, so, talk about that a little bit, the statewide glut.
Well, the estimates are that California, and especially Humboldt County and Santa Barbara County as the top two counties for licenses to grow cannabis, is producing something like 3 times as much as can be consumed here.
And that's legal. That's the legal stuff.
And then there's an illegal market, which the estimates range from 2/3 of sales to even up to 90% of sales. So this market is just very difficult to address, and it's not going away, at least anytime soon. So yeah, prices have dropped from something like $1,200 per pound for wholesale flower, cannabis flower, and in 2021 to something like 500 today.
Yeah. You know, I'm old enough to remember when the California lottery was voted in, I think 1982, 1983, something like that. And you know, at the time, it was just hailed as, you know, this was going to save the state finances. This was going to, you know, pay for schools forever. And it was all a crock. And I really had the same feeling about this ordinance, you know, where they were proclaiming to the skies how this was going to be, you know, the revenue savior. And in fact, it's failing. It's not working, even though they do their best to kind of try to pump it up. Those are my words, obviously not yours, but that's what I see happening.
It's hard to see the future, but if the federal ban comes down and we have a national legalization of marijuana, and then you can sell across state lines, and maybe then you know, the price goes up, and so do tax revenues. But at the same time, if you can legally grow cannabis, you know, in Iowa, wouldn't you rather pay very little for the land there and grow it than grow it in California? So it's hard to see the future.
Yeah. And probably, you know, what that would look like. And I agree, you know, that's the, you know, sort of second act of what they're seeing here. You know, we're going to wait for the federal ban to come down, and boy, the money's going to roll in there. There would be a few large growers who might benefit from that cartel wise. You know, shout out Graham Farrar, for example, Smiling Graham, who is the biggest beneficiary of all this. The other thing that really popped out at me that people may or may not know, and you just alluded to it, that Santa Barbara County, you write, is the #1 county in California. #1 county in California for active cannabis cultivation licenses. 22% of the total. We have 1.6% of the land in California, but yet we have almost a quarter of the licenses. Why is that?
Well, that's because the County Board of Supervisors here did open up a great deal of cultivation area for cannabis. There's a cap in the North County mainly. They call it the inland area, on something like 1,575 acres, and pretty much that that's signed up for. It's not necessarily finished getting permits or business licenses. In fact, most growers in the county do not have county business licenses yet. But and then on the South Coast, it's Carpinteria, and it's all in greenhouses, 186 acres. And so that acreage is what is driving the number of licenses. And we go back and forth with Humboldt because it changes from
Humboldt County. Roll them and smoke them. You know, they've been you know, it's just the iconic center of cannabis cultivation in America, California for forever. But we have now passed them. We're #1.
Yep, that's why they call us Santa Barbara County.
The other, I want to go through the story kind of line by line, but the other thing that really popped out at me about the meeting was for a long time, you know, there was just a solid 3 votes on the Board of Supervisors. It didn't matter what cannabis question was before them. They were going to vote for the industry. And that, of course, is Das Williams, Steve Lavanino, who the architects of this, as you point out. And at the time, Greg Hart, Supervisor Greg Hart, who, of course, has moved on to the Assembly and been replaced by Laura Capps, the aforementioned Laura Capps. And she, Tuesday, really, you know, asked some pointed questions. I think very, you know, she wasn't grandstanding about it. They were all serious policy questions. And it was the first time that I remember, anyway, that happening by a member of the board since Janet Wolf was on the board back before this thing passed in 2018. And I was struck by the reaction of Lavanino and Das, which kind of harkened back to what they used to do to Janet when she did raise questions about it. And that was, sort of fling their toxic masculinity at them. When she started doing this, how did Das react?
Well, he immediately said that cannabis policy was not on the agenda for Tuesday, that it was basically a budget update.
And yeah, which is, of course, absurd. If you read the staff report, it's all about cannabis policy and the tax policy and other things that are happening. And what about Lavanino? What did he do?
He took he objected to Laura Capps asking about the number of people who have been assigned to cannabis in the county. So there are about 30 people. There are 4,300 people who work for the county, he said, and 30 people on cannabis, especially, doing following up on the taxes, overseeing the taxes, doing the permits, tracking down perhaps illegal operations, and so on.
I think
it's not a waste of time. And he pointed out that, a number of them, in fact, 18 of them are paid for by industry fees. And then the rest, 12, are paid out of the general fund. And that's about $5,000 a year. And so we have maybe 5 million a year. So maybe the whole cost is about 7 million. 2 million comes from the industry. 5 million comes from the general fund. But if you figure they're only projecting, say, 6 million from cannabis revenues this year, that doesn't leave a whole lot left over for the many programs that they would like to fund with cannabis, including libraries and parks and roads, maintenance, all of the things that they told the public that cannabis would pay for. Cannabis paid for example, it pays for one-time expenditures such as $2 million for the San Marcos foothills land conservation. So they're having to use this year about $10 million in carryover cannabis funds from previous years in order to pay for what they call their cannabis program, which includes all of these public services, long-range planners, and there's a whole list of stuff. But that money isn't going to be around, that carryover, much of it, for 23, 24. And so then it's just going to be, property taxes, again, paying for these things, which they do anyway.
Let me posit to you that the whole idea of the cannabis program is a crock, to use the technical term, because no other tax is singled out. And this money goes to the general fund. That's where it's supposed to go. No other, and I think Capps pointed this out. It's not like the TOT tax. We say, oh, here's what the TOT tax pays for these things. And it's not like either that the programs that they allege that cannabis program is paying for are not going to be funded. And I think Capps pointed that out as well. And you're sending a signal to people, oh, your libraries are going to be closed. The whole thing is spin, that they pull out cannabis revenues as some special thing and say, oh, see, we couldn't exist without them. But the amount of money that it is in a what, 1.2, 1.3 billion dollar budget is minuscule. Again, my words, not yours. You do a fine job of being, very neutral language on this, but this is how I read that story. That's what I find between the lines.
Property taxes are something like 80% of the general fund, and cannabis taxes are about 1.5%. And Laura did say at the meeting, she raised that question. She asked the budget officials to explain why there was a cannabis program, and it's really general fund expenditures.
It is.
And they said it was because of the volatility of the cannabis revenue. They had to be sure, not to make long-term commitments with this money.
Cannabis program.
And she responded that she would like to see that changed. There was no comment on that.
The first time I saw that cannabis program separated out, by the way, was during the 2020 supervisors race for the first district, when Laura challenged us. And at the League of Women Voters debate, he suddenly had this piece of paper that he was handing out to everyone, which I'm sure Darcel Elliott, his chief of staff and the head of the Democratic Party County Committee, produced in a fine fashion now on the public payroll. Again, my words, not yours. This stuff just really gets to me. Okay, let me just ask you about a couple things as we just kind of go through this, and we've touched on a lot of them. The Coalition for Responsible Cannabis, Santa Barbara Coalition for Responsible Cannabis. Who are they, and what was their reaction to this?
They were also objecting to what they refer to as paltry tax revenues from cannabis, and calling for changes in the ordinance, specifically to address the tax structure for cannabis. At least one of the representatives from the board. That's a coalition that spans the whole county. And they have members from Tepiscate Canyon all the way down to Carpinteria, San Ynez Valley, Santa Rita Hills, Lompoc, and Carpinteria. And they are the group that has, in the past, filed the most appeals. Something like 59 or 60 appeals had, is that right? Or is it 89? No, something like 60 appeals of 89 projects over this past 5 years. And that's a lot of appeals. That means, people are pretty angry about the whole.
And most of them, or many of them at least, before the Planning Commission, the commission agreed with, and then of course it was overturned by the Soviet Politburo vote on the Board of Supervisors. My words, not yours, Melinda.
So what they're trying to do now is zero in, at least there was some discussion of this at the board, by Laura and by Bob Nelson, that the tax structure is not working because, again, in this report, as in previous reports, of about 71 growers, cannabis growers in the county, you have only 40 reporting that, their earnings, that the tax structure is based on their gross receipts,
rather than acreage, which is the way it is in
rather than square
almost
footage.
every other county, I think.
Square footage, yeah, of the canopy under cultivation.
But this is a self-reporting system that they have, right? I mean, it's
difficult. It's like whack-a-mole because it's not like the same person every quarter is not reporting. It's different people. And maybe they followed their land, and so they didn't have any earnings, so they didn't think they had to file. And then they got a call from the CEO's office or the treasurer saying, you have to file. And so then they were late and didn't get into the report. And or maybe they didn't pay their taxes and then they paid after the quarter. But it's a recurring and a problem. And CAPS did ask at the meeting how much money the county was losing under this system, and that question has been asked by the supervisors before, and that's a real guesstimate because nobody knows exactly. But the guesstimate right now is about half. That doesn't mean when they were taking in 16 million a year, or that 1 year, that they were losing 16 million, but right now, and they could be losing 5 million.
And that issue, the tax, the acreage versus the receipts, was a central part of the county grand jury report, which is extremely critical of the ordinance. Just really dissembled it in a very clear and easy way. And of course, the supervisors kissed it off. But because there wouldn't be any guesswork if it was on an acreage. This is how much you're cultivating. This is what you owe.
Again, they had a discussion about this last May, and they were on the verge of doing some at that meeting. But then they realized is that even the counties that are charging by square footage have had to change that system because too many growers were going out of business. And so the supervisors here thought that they might like to establish or find out more about implementing a square footage system that was sort of geared to the market, so that it would increase, taxes would increase if the market was up, and it would decrease if the market was down. But very hard to figure out how to do that, how to come up with a formula, because you don't want the public to lose out, and also you don't want to be unfair to the growers. So they haven't come up with a different formula yet. Any formula has to go on the ballot again, and because this current system was approved by the voters here, so that would take another year or more. So
yeah, well, and one of the other things the grand jury report pointed out was this ordinance was crafted basically behind closed doors by Das and Lavanino with the help of high-paid lobbyists for the cannabis industry. The LA Times reporting on this, of course, found emails and texts between Das and growers and lobbyists, where he displayed a great obedience to their wishes. And I think it's fair to say, and everybody would agree, this is a very pro-industry ordinance that we have. It favors the growers. That's what it's about. I want to go back to a couple of points. One, you mentioned Nelson talking about the change in the tax structure. And that it was interesting that after CAPS raised these questions and there was this discussion, and Das and Steve both tried to knock it down. Both Joan Hartman and Nelson said, well, there are concerns that I have, which I think, for those inside baseball people who follow this kind of thing, that was a significant moment because what you could see, I think, was a potential majority of supervisors who might be in favor of making changes to this horrible ordinance. Hartman has been very meek. I think she's been kind of bullied by Das, who controls the Democratic Party. She's running for re-election next year in a redistricted district that's more difficult. She wants and needs that Democratic Party endorsement, so she really hasn't been very vocal. And Nelson, who represents part of North County, who I am increasingly impressed with as someone who seems like an independent thinker and is his own man. Is that your impression?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting now with Laura on the board to see what kinds of changes, if any, are in the works. And there's definitely a number of avenues that they could take. So taxes is one, enforcement on the smell, which is the number one issue for the public. Enforcement is a huge and very naughty problem because of
Well, but it's, as Joan pointed out, it's complaint driven. You have to complain, and these people have complained dozens, scores, maybe hundreds of times. Oh, we can't figure out whose it is.
well, it's very clustered there. The greenhouses are very close together, and it is very hard to figure out who's responsible for the smell. So,
But isn't that why the growers should be using the best available technology there is, which, as I understand it, is carbon scrubbers?
I think that both of the citizens groups, Concerned Carpinterians, and which is a more loosely knit group than, and is the group now filing appeals, because the coalition signed an agreement with the growers and is holding off on appeals. Both of those groups want scrubbers in every greenhouse in Carpinteria.
But it's optional, correct? I mean, the county is not requiring that they use the best available technology.
That's correct. And the way things stand right now, the county depends on industrial engineers for each grower to state what the best available technology is for each project. And in a couple of very recent projects, they have not said that it's the scrubbers. They have gone back to the vapor phase, which the difference between the two systems is vapor phase sets up a mist outside the greenhouse to neutralize the smell after it leaves the vents in the greenhouse roof. And the scrubbers work inside the greenhouse to stop the smell before it gets out of the greenhouse roof. So the public that's been calling for stronger regulations now for 5 years wants those scrubbers in every greenhouse.
You know, one of the issues that you've covered over the years, and you know, full disclosure, you know, covered when you and I worked together at the morning newspaper, was farm worker issues, migrant farmers, particularly farm workers. And the LA Times recently had a really a powerful story about how they're getting sick from this stuff, respiratory illnesses and so on. Do you have any information or indication of how that's playing here? Is that happening here?
Let's just say that I'm trying to find out.
Good, because nobody else is. And then I just want to double back on one other point, which was, you know, this, I don't know, you know, sexist, there's no other word for it, a way that Dawson Levanino went after Laura in the same way they used to go after Janet Wolf. And Levanino says, I got to find this quote from him, where he accuses her of bringing campaign issues into the Board of Supervisors. First of all, you know, his chief of staff is the former head of the Republican Party here and ran, you know, an independent expenditure, you know, anonymous until I reported on it, fund against Laura Capps when she ran against Doss. So, you know, I'm shocked there's politics in the Board of Supervisors thing. First of all, but secondly, she wasn't bringing, who's she running against? She was just elected. She didn't have any opponent. What's he talking about? Campaign issues. These are serious policy matters, are they not?
Definitely. But she did run against Doss for the seat in Carpinteria, and she was, you know, calling for stronger regulation of the industry at that time in that campaign. Maybe he's referring to that. I don't know.
All right. Let's leave it there because I know there'll be much more. Melinda Burns, you are a treasure and a community hero. And thank you for all your reporting on this and other important issues. I mean, the difference is, people can report on a meeting and, sound like the recording secretary. He said, she said, and so on. And you really pile fact upon fact upon fact into your reporting in a way that is fair and neutral, and people can draw their own conclusions. And it's clear, I'm sure, what my conclusions have been based on my commentary tonight. But thank you for your work and for all you do. And it's great to have you back. You've been away. I know you've had some personal issues that you're dealing with, and I'm so relieved and glad that you're back, because the fox is guarding the hen house over there.
Well, Jerry, I just want to thank you for bringing me on, and also for all of the help that you give us journalists here in Santa Barbara. That small press corps in this town needs all the help it can get, and you're there spreading, helping to get our work out there, and that's really important.
All right. Melinda Burns, Enterprise Investigative Reporter, thank you very much. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.